Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The maps glowed under dim light, voices clipped, hands tracing lines of attack and retreat. Yet when her name was called, silence hung heavier than smoke in the room. She shifted in her seat, listening, waiting, but no one looked her way. She could almost hear her heart beat louder than the overhead fan. The men had learned to speak over her, to nod past her, to pretend the scars on her cheek were distractions instead of history. She carried those marks like medals no one wanted to see, but to her they weren't disfigurements. They were coordinates, a star map carved into her skin. Each line had meaning. Each scar told her where not to get lost again. And yet they would not listen. The commander's voice cut through, flat and rehearsed. We'll insert at 200, flank from the east. Intel suggests light resistance. She knew it wasn't true. There was something wrong about the coordinates, something that screamed at her like a red flare only she could see. But she stayed quiet. She had learned long ago, sometimes speaking was more dangerous than silence. Still, she wondered, would silence cost more lives tonight? The others gathered their gear, laughter rough around the edges, nerves disguised as confidence. She stood slower, hands brushing against her rifle's worn grip. The weapon had outlasted friends, missions, even her faith in people. But it hadn't outlasted her. Not yet. Outside, the desert wind stung. Fine sand scraped across her skin like whispers she couldn't quite catch. She closed her eyes for just a second and memory pressed in. A night much like this one. A convoy ambushed, smoke boiling into the sky, screams tangled with radio static. She had crawled from the wreckage with half her face torn open, blood turning the sand black beneath her. Her team had not crawled out at all. That was years ago, but some nights like this night the air smelled the same, burnt metal, dust, anticipation. She pulled her scarf higher across her mouth. The transport rattled as they rolled out. She sat at the edge, eyes tracing the horizon. One of the younger soldiers, Ramirez, caught her glance and gave a thin smile. He was barely 20, freckles still sharp against sunburnt skin. "Nervous?" he asked, trying too hard to sound casual. She shook her head, "Just awake." He chuckled, tapping his helmet. "Wish I could say the same." For a moment she almost smiled. Almost. But her eyes caught the way his hands trembled slightly against his rifle, the way his breathing worked too fast when silence stretched. He reminded her of someone, of herself, years ago, before she stopped believing nerves had any use. She turned away before the memory could finish forming. The convoy slowed, tires grinding against gravel. The commander signaled them to move out. Moonlight spilled thin over the valley, pale and ghost-like. Every step crunched too loudly in her ears. She lagged a second behind, scanning shadows, counting silhouettes. The silence was too neat, too staged. She wanted to speak up, to warn them again, but her throat closed around the words. Then movement. Her body stiffened before her mind caught up. A glint, a shift of stone that wasn't natural. She dropped to a knee, raising her rifle too late. The first blast ripped through the night. Heat, dust, bodies thrown against the earth. Screams shredded the quiet. She rolled into cover, lungs burning. A second blast followed, closer. She could feel shards biting her arm, hear the ringing in her skull. Her training was instinct now. Check the sightline, find the shooter, return fire. But her heart wasn't racing, it was steady. Too steady, because some part of her had been waiting for this. She took the shot. One target down, another emerged. She adjusted, squeezed, another fell. Around her, chaos bled into panic. Someone shouted for medics, another for ammo. Ramirez's voice cracked through comms, high and desperate. And still the commander's plan played in her head. Flank from the east. Light resistance. She knew then it hadn't been a mistake. It had been a lie. Why? The question burned sharper than the cuts on her skin. She crawled to Ramirez, who was pinned behind a broken slab of concrete. His face was pale, streaked with dirt and fear. She pressed her shoulder to his. "Breathe slower," she said. "You'll waste air if you don't." He nodded, swallowing hard. "We're screwed, aren't we?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she peeked above cover, scanned the ridge. The stars overhead seemed brighter than they should have been, piercing holes in the dark. And for a fleeting second, she imagined her scars glowing back at them, constellations only she could read. Somewhere in those stars was a path out. She dragged in a breath, heavy with smoke. There was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Her hands clenched tighter around the rifle. She had studied this terrain weeks ago, alone, because she didn't trust the maps they'd been fed. She had memorized ridges, choke points, places where shadows swallowed sound. And she knew there was only one way they would survive tonight. But to follow it, they would have to trust her. The very woman they refused to see. She glanced at Ramirez. He was shaking, lips cracked, eyes darting everywhere but hers. She lowered her voice, steady, almost calm. "Do you believe me?" He blinked at her, startled. "What? If I tell you to move when I move, do you believe me?" Ramirez hesitated, and then something in her gaze must have convinced him. He gave the smallest nod. Good, one believer was enough to begin. She checked her watch, waited for the silence between bursts of gunfire, then moved. Ramirez followed. They slipped into the jagged path along the rocks, using shadows like shields. Behind them, shouts and gunfire thundered. Ahead, uncertainty. But every scar on her skin pulled her forward like compass needles. Her scars were constellations, and tonight they were guiding her through a sky no one else could read. Why did Ramirez keep glancing back? Every few steps, his eyes flickered over his shoulder toward the flashes of gunfire where their team was still pinned. His breathing was uneven, too loud, and she knew the sound carried farther than either of them wanted. But she didn't scold him. Fear was normal. It kept the blood moving. It reminded you you were alive. She remembered when she used to look back, too. The first mission she survived, barely. She couldn't stop turning her head, waiting for someone to call her back, waiting for an order that would put things back into place. But the truth was simpler, crueler. No one came for you, not unless you carried yourself forward. Now it was her turn to teach him the same. The valley narrowed into a passage that smelled of dry stone and powder. Her boots crunched carefully, each step chosen like a secret. She raised her fist and Ramirez froze instantly, training overriding panic. Good, he was learning. She tilted her head, listening. The world had a rhythm most people ignored. The wind shifted low against the rocks. The gunfire in the distance staggered and paused like lungs pulling for air. Between those beats, silence wasn't empty. It was full of warning. She crouched lower, tracing the edges of the path with her eyes. A thin glint near the ground caught her attention. She extended her knife, careful, and lifted a wire taut between two stones. "Trip mine." Ramirez's eyes widened. He mouthed, "How did you see that?" She didn't answer. She just cut the wire, slow and deliberate, and tucked it into her vest pocket. Every scar on her body had been earned by mistakes like that, mistakes she refused to repeat. Ramirez exhaled in a shaky whisper. "I'd have been blown apart." She allowed herself the faintest smile. "Not today." They pressed on. The path opened slightly, revealing a shelf of rock that overlooked the valley floor. From here, she could see everything. Her team's last known position, the plumes of dust where mortars had struck, the jagged silhouette of enemy fighters darting between cover. It was worse than the commander had admitted. Dozens of them, not a light resistance at all. Her jaw tightened. Why lie to them? The question throbbed behind her eyes, mixing with the sound of distant cries for medics, with the sight of muzzle flashes flickering like dying stars below. She forced her breathing steady. Emotion had its place, but not here, not yet. Ramirez sank against the rock, wiping his brow. His freckles were streaked with grime, his lips moving silently, maybe praying. She watched him for a moment and something stirred inside her. He wasn't supposed to be here. Too young, too soft around the edges. Yet here he was, learning the hardest lessons in the ugliest classroom the world had to offer. And wasn't that her once? She shook the thought away before it cut too deep. Through her scope she tracked the ridge opposite theirs. 3 figures, snipers. She marked their positions mentally, felt the rhythm of their breathing even from here. One was impatient, shifting often. One was steady, disciplined. The third wasn't watching the battlefield at all. He was looking toward her ridge. Her scars itched suddenly, like the skin remembered something before her mind did. She ducked low, pulling Ramirez with her. A shot cracked against stone, shards slicing her cheek. So they knew she was here. Ramirez flinched. They see us. Not us, she whispered, me. The boy stared, confused, but she had no time to explain the kind of recognition that came with scars. Some enemies remembered faces, just as she remembered theirs. Her radio crackled, static first, then a voice she didn't expect. The commander. All units regroup east sector. Repeat east sector, push forward. Her teeth clenched. East sector was suicide. A flat expanse with no cover, no escape. Orders like that weren't incompetence. They were something worse. Ramirez frowned. Should we go? She looked at him, at the hope knotted inside his question. He still believed orders meant safety. Still believed leaders told the truth. She hated the moment she had to break that for him. No, she said softly. His eyes searched hers. Then what do we do? She glanced once more at the stars above, at the faint map only she seemed to carry in her skin. And she thought of her old team, gone now but not forgotten. Their voices still lived in her memory, unfinished sentences, jokes cut short, promises that never saw morning. She would not let tonight end the same way. We move where the sky tells us, she murmured. Ramirez looked baffled, but he followed anyway. They slipped down the backside of the ridge, sliding on loose gravel, each sound swallowed by distance. At the bottom they found another survivor, Corporal Singh. He was slumped against a rock, leg twisted unnaturally, eyes glazed with pain. Blood soaked his pants, dark and heavy. She dropped beside him instantly, checking the wound. He tried to push her hand away weakly. Don't waste time, he rasped. You're not dead yet, she answered flatly. His lips pulled into something like a grin, cold as always. Ramirez crouched awkwardly nearby, his face pale. We can't carry him. She cut him off with a sharp look. We don't leave our own. Ramirez swallowed hard, nodding, but Singh shook his head. She's right about one thing, kid. I'm done. Don't let her fool you with that steel voice. She knows it too. She ignored him, tearing cloth, binding the wound tight. Her hands worked with practiced speed, but her chest burned with anger. Singh was a good man. Too good for this. He once told her, over bad rations and worse weather, that he dreamed of opening a small bakery when the war was over. Bread, he said, was the one thing that reminded him of home. And now, home might never come for him. Her voice dropped low, almost breaking. You're not done, Singh, not tonight. He studied her, eyes soft despite the pain. You never change, do you? Still carrying everyone else's weight. The words cut deeper than the sand in her wounds, because they were true. Ramirez shifted nervously. We have to move, they'll find us. She looked between them, the boy terrified but loyal, the man broken but alive, and herself caught in the middle, scarred, haunted, still breathing. A gunshot rang out nearby, close, too close. Her decision was made for her. She gripped Singh's arm. Lean on me. He hissed through his teeth but obeyed. Ramirez darted to the other side, offering his shoulder. Together they pulled him up. Each step was agony for all 3 of them, but the stars above remained clear, guiding, constant. Every scar on her skin reminded her, survival was never solitary. The night stretched long as they staggered across terrain, every shadow a threat, every sound a question. Behind them the battle still raged. Ahead of them, uncertainty. But her scars kept pulling her forward. And she knew this. The lie in the commander's voice was only the beginning. There was something darker waiting, something that tied this mission to the wounds she had carried for years. Something she had not told them. Not yet. Why did the stars look closer tonight? She had stared at skis in deserts, jungles, mountains, but this night was different. The constellations pressed in as if they wanted to be read, and in their silent pull she felt something she had not allowed herself in years, a strange, fragile hope. Ramirez stumbled on loose gravel, nearly dragging Singh down with him. She caught both their weight before it collapsed into disaster. Her shoulders ached, her lungs burned. Still, she carried. Singh groaned, whispering curses under his breath. "Leave me. I'll only slow you down." She ignored him, jaw locked. "Keep talking, it means you're alive." Ramirez tried to help adjust Singh's arm over his shoulder. His voice shook. "She doesn't quit, does she?" Singh gave a weak chuckle, then coughed. "She never did. Back when I first met her, she was the quiet one at the fire, never laughed at the jokes, never complained either, just sat there sharpening that knife of hers, like she was cutting the night itself." She didn't respond, she didn't want to. Memories pressed too close. But Singh wasn't done. "One night I asked her why she never smiled. You know what she told me, Ramirez?" The boy glanced over nervously. "What?" Singh winced as they climbed over a jagged ridge. His voice came out ragged but steady. "She said, 'I'll smile when I'm home again.'" Silence followed, heavy as the dark around them. She wished he hadn't told that story, because she remembered that night too. The firelight flickering, the faces of men who weren't alive anymore. She had spoken those words, half a promise, half a lie. Home wasn't waiting. Home was gone long before she admitted it to herself. She kept moving, because if she stopped, the weight of memory would crush her. The stars blinked above, uncaring, eternal. A sudden rustle snapped her back. Instinct dropped her to a knee, rifle raised. Ramirez froze, eyes wide. Singh leaned heavy, nearly falling without her support. From the shadows, two figures emerged. Enemy fighters. One carried a rifle, the other a blade glinting faintly. Their voices murmured in a tongue Ramirez didn't understand, but she did. They were scouting, searching. She pressed a finger to her lips. Ramirez nodded, breath caught in his throat. Singh shut his eyes, jaw trembling with effort to stay quiet. The fighters drew closer, their boots crunching softly in the dust. 10 meters, 5. Her finger tightened on the trigger. But then a sound split the night, a faint crackle of radio static. Not hers, theirs. One of the fighters raised his comm, listening. "East sector, push forward. Commander requests full advance." Her blood ran cold. The same order. Ramirez's eyes darted to hers. His face asked what his lips dared not. Why was the enemy hearing the same orders as them? Her scars itched. Answers swirled, but none made sense, not yet. The fighters moved on, fading into darkness. She lowered her rifle slowly, heart pounding in her ears. Singh whispered hoarsely, "What the hell was that?" She didn't answer, not because she couldn't, but because the truth forming in her mind was too heavy to speak aloud. Not yet. They pressed on, deeper into the rocks. Singh's weight dragged her slower now, every step a battle. Ramirez kept looking to her for reassurance she couldn't give. He needed a leader. He needed faith. But all she had were scars. The terrain dipped into a hollow, a shadowed basin where the wind died. She guided them inside, easing Singh down against a boulder. He groaned, clutching his leg. Ramirez knelt, fumbling with the bandage, trying to adjust it. His hands shook so badly the fabric slipped. She crouched beside him, covering his hands with hers. "Steady, don't fight your nerves, feel them, then let them go." He blinked at her, breathing ragged. How do you just let fear go?" She looked away for a moment, eyes tracing the scar that cut across her wrist, the oldest one, from her first mission. You don't, she said softly. It stays. You just learn to move with it. Ramirez swallowed hard, nodded. His trembling eased slightly. Singh gave a half-smile through clenched teeth. Listen to her, kid. She's walked through hell and kept the map. Her chest tightened. The words were meant as a compliment, but they landed like weight on her shoulders. She stood, scanning the horizon through her scope. Far off, she caught faint glimmers of movement, enemy vehicles repositioning, closing in like a noose. The commander's voice crackled faintly again through her radio, repeating the order to push east. Each word was a blade. Ramirez looked up at her, voice low. Why do you think he keeps saying that? Doesn't he know it's a death trap? She lowered the scope slowly, eyes fixed on the ground. She knew. Somewhere inside, beneath the layers of training, discipline, and silence, she had begun piecing it together. The lie about resistance, the impossible order, the enemy carrying the same comms traffic. This wasn't strategy. It was betrayal. But she couldn't say it. Not yet. If she named it out loud, it would break what little faith Ramirez still had. Instead, she crouched low again, meeting his eyes. You trust me, right? His throat bobbed as he nodded. Then follow me, no matter what you hear. Ramirez held her gaze, searching, then whispered, okay. She turned back to Singh, who looked at her knowingly, too tired for words. He had seen enough to understand what she hadn't spoken. His silence was both a mercy and a curse. The night deepened. They moved again, slower, Singh's weight nearly unbearable. Ramirez bore more of the load now, his young frame strained but unyielding. She led them through gullies and shadows, guided not by maps or orders but by instinct, and the constellations carved into her skin. Every scar reminded her where she had bled. Every scar reminded her she was still alive. They reached another ridge, lower this time, giving them a view of the desert stretching endless ahead. The horizon shimmered faintly, even under moonlight. Heat still radiated from the earth. She paused, scanning. In the distance, faint headlights glowed, enemy convoys moving fast, too fast. Her stomach sank. The enemy knew exactly where they were headed, which meant someone had told them. Her hand tightened around her rifle. She thought of her commander's voice, the one that dismissed her warnings, that spoke lies with ease. And she thought of the scars on her face, the night her old team had been wiped out because someone had fed the enemy their route. This wasn't new. This was repetition. Ramirez noticed the look on her face. What is it? Her lips parted, but no sound came. Because the truth was heavier than the desert night. She looked back at Singh, at Ramirez, at the stars overhead. And she whispered to herself, so softly they could not hear. Not again. I won't let it happen again. The wind shifted. Somewhere far off, a flare cracked the sky red. And she knew the night was only beginning. Why was the flare red? It painted the desert sky like a wound bleeding against the black. Red meant distress. Red meant exposure. Red meant they weren't hiding anymore. Ramirez froze beneath the glow, his young face caught in its wash. Singh winced, dragging breath through his teeth, the color making his pallor look almost ghost-like. She stared upward, unmoving, her rifle pressed against her chest. She had seen red flares before. The night her convoy was ambushed, one had risen through the smoke. She never forgot it. The way it hung there like a cruel beacon, pointing to their deaths. She had crawled from fire and blood that night, her cheek torn open, her skin branded with the stars she carried now. And tonight, here it was again. Ramirez's whisper cracked. They know we're here, don't they? She didn't answer, because answering meant saying yes. The desert held its breath. No wind, no sound, only the echo of their shared fear. She lowered her head, pulled Singh's arm tighter over her shoulders, and started walking. Where are we going? Ramirez asked, voice trembling. North, she said. Why north? Because east is death, south is gone. West is where we came from, that leaves north. Ramirez swallowed hard, nodding. He didn't question again. Singh managed a chuckle that broke into a cough. She always was stubborn. The boy glanced at him. Always. Singh nodded, grimacing through the pain. First time I saw her, we were green as grass, training op. She wouldn't take cover when the instructor barked it. Just stood there, staring him down. Got herself chewed out for 10 minutes straight. Ramirez blinked at her. Why? She didn't respond, didn't want to. But Singh answered for her, his smile faint. Because she already knew cover wouldn't always be there. Better to stand and face it, even if it hurt. Her jaw tightened. She didn't want stories from the past. Not tonight. Not while the future pressed in so violently. But Singh's words reminded her every scar wasn't just pain. They were lessons. Hard ones. Ones she couldn't let Ramirez forget. The red flare burned out, leaving the sky darker than before. Their steps carried them across uneven rock, each sound too sharp in the silence. She kept her eyes on the stars, tracing invisible lines only she could see. The constellations told her which ridges would shield them, which shadows would carry them farther. Still the weight grew. Singh leaned heavier, his body trembling against hers. Ramirez bore more than his share, his breaths ragged, his face drawn tight with exhaustion. She wanted to take all the weight herself, but she couldn't. She wasn't invincible. None of them were. A faint rumble rolled across the night. Engines, convoys moving, too close. She dropped low, signaling the others to crouch. Ramirez obeyed instantly. Singh groaned but sank beside the rock, sweat glistening on his brow. They waited, breaths shallow, as headlights swept faint arcs across the horizon. She raised her scope, saw dust trails, saw the insignias on the trucks, and heard it again. The commander's voice crackling through the enemy's comms. Push east, repeat east sector. Her chest hollowed. The truth was undeniable now. Ramirez leaned close, whispering, "Why are they saying the same thing we are?" She lowered the scope slowly, meeting his eyes. She could see the question burning there, see the last thread of trust he still clung to. She wanted to protect that trust, wanted to shield him from the weight of betrayal. But lies were heavier than truth. Her voice came out quiet, flat, "Because he's not leading us, he's leading them." Ramirez stared, his lips parting. Singh's eyes closed, his head sagging back against the rock. Betrayal wasn't a word that needed repeating. Its shape was clear on their faces. Ramirez shook his head. "No, that can't be right. He's our commander, he wouldn't." She cut him off, sharper than she meant. "He would, he has." The boy flinched at her tone, but she didn't apologize. There was no time for soft edges now. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would he do that?" Her eyes traced the horizon, searching for answers the desert wouldn't give. The real why was buried in shadows she hadn't uncovered yet. Money, revenge, control, she didn't know. But she knew this. They were pawns, expendable, just as her old team had been. Her scars burned, memory colliding with the present. She saw fire, heard screams, tasted blood. And above it all, she remembered her commander's voice then, too calm, rehearsed, empty. She clenched her rifle tighter, grounding herself in the now. "We move," she said. They pushed north again, each step heavier. Singh's breaths grew ragged, his strength fraying. Ramirez glanced at her often, his eyes torn between doubt and faith. She gave him nothing but silence and steady motion. Sometimes silence was all leadership allowed. After what felt like hours, they found a hollow cut into the earth, a shallow cave shielded from the wind. She eased Singh down carefully, propping him against stone. Ramirez collapsed beside him, chest heaving. She stood at the mouth of the cave, scanning the horizon, her mind running with questions that had no answers. Singh's voice rasped behind her. "You should have left me, you still should." She didn't turn. "I told you not tonight." He chuckled weakly, stubborn. The sound faded into silence. Ramirez broke it softly. What about you? Why do you fight like this? What's it for? She froze. The boy's question wasn't naive. It was raw, desperate. He wanted something to hold on to, a reason, a truth. Her eyes closed, and for the first time she let the memory rise. She saw her sister, younger, brighter, always laughing. The one who used to trace constellations with her finger against the window pane, nomming them wrong on purpose just to make her smile. The one who enlisted years after her, against her advice. The one who never came home. Her throat tightened. She hadn't spoken her sister's name aloud in years. The scars on her skin were maps, but the deepest scar was absence. She turned, looking at Ramirez, at Singh. The words came out like a confession. I fight because I couldn't save her. Ramirez blinked, startled. Singh's gaze softened. Her voice wavered but didn't break. She believed in something bigger. She followed it into the dark. And when she was gone, I realized the only way I could live with myself was to keep walking where she couldn't, to carry it, to carry her. Ramirez swallowed hard, and the scars. She touched her cheek lightly, tracing the lines. They're hers too. Every time I wanted to stop, they reminded me, you can't quit when someone else never got the chance. The cave filled with silence again, thick and heavy. But this silence wasn't empty. It was full, full of memory, full of meaning. Singh murmured, "You've been carrying ghosts longer than we knew." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Outside, the night shifted. Voices echoed faintly in the distance. Enemy patrols. The flare had drawn them close. She raised her rifle again, body tense. Ramirez mirrored her, hand steadier this time. Singh rested his head back, eyes half closed, but a faint smile lingered. The fight wasn't over. The betrayal wasn't solved. The night wasn't done. But for the first time in years, her scars felt less like wounds and more like stars, guiding her through a sky no one else could read. Why did the silence feel louder than the gunfire? The cave was still, but every heartbeat echoed like thunder. She pressed her back against the stone, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the mouth of the hollow. Ramirez crouched low beside her, rifle trembling faintly in his hands. Singh lay against the rock wall, breath shallow, skin pale beneath the streaks of blood and dirt. The enemy voices drifted closer, muffled, searching. She raised a hand, signaling Ramirez to steady. His chest rose too fast, breath too sharp. She leaned close, whispering just enough for him to hear. "Slow, count it in your head. In, out." He nodded, his lips moving soundlessly. 1, 2, 3, 4. His breaths began to match hers. The patrol's boots scraped against stone. A flashlight beam swept past the cave entrance, spilling white light for a fraction of a second. She stayed frozen, body taut, rifle ready. If they entered, it would be over. The beam passed, voices moved on, boots faded into distance. Only then did she breathe again. Ramirez sagged forward, shoulders trembling. Singh let out a faint laugh that cracked into a cough. Close one. She didn't smile. She knew this was just the beginning. The flare had called them like moths. They would sweep this sector until nothing was left alive. She scanned Singh's leg. The bandage was soaked, his skin cold. He was losing too much blood. Ramirez saw it too. "We can't keep moving him like this." He stopped, biting down on the words. She said them for him. He won't last the night. Singh met her eyes. There was no fear there, just quiet acceptance. "You're finally being honest." Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to insist on carrying him farther, but she knew the truth. She had carried too many men past the point of saving, watched them slip away anyway. Singh deserved more than false promises. She crouched close, lowering her voice. "We'll buy you time." He smirked faintly. Time for what? To tell another story. She didn't answer, but Ramirez leaned in. "Yeah, tell one." Singh's eyes flickered between them. The smirk softened into something gentler. "When I was a kid, my father used to wake before sunrise. He'd knead dough in the kitchen while the rest of us slept. Said bread was the heart of the house. That smell, it meant everything was okay, safe. When I joined, I thought maybe I'd bring that back one day. Open a shop. Let strangers taste what home used to be. Ramirez swallowed hard, his voice cracked. You still can when we get out. Singh cut him off with a weak chuckle. Don't lie to me, kid. You're terrible at it. The boy dropped his gaze, eyes wet. She closed her eyes briefly, the smell of imagined bread mingling with dust and blood. Singh's dream lingered in the air like something fragile, something undeservedly pure. Outside, engines roared faintly, convoys shifting again. She raised her scope, peering through the narrow slit of the cave. Dust plumes moved against the horizon, and there, headlights turning toward their sector. They were coming. She lowered the scope, turning to Ramirez. We can't stay. His eyes widened, but Singh. Singh interrupted, his voice thin but firm. He's right, you can't drag me any farther, not if you want to live. The boy shook his head violently. No, we don't leave you. Singh gripped his wrist, surprisingly strong. You want my last order, Ramirez. You follow her, you survive. That's how you don't leave me. Ramirez's lip trembled. He looked at her, pleading silently. She forced her voice steady. He's right, we split. It's the only way. Ramirez's eyes searched hers, desperate for another option. She gave him none. Singh leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. Give me your extra mag, kid. Let me go down with some fire. Ramirez's hand shook as he pulled a magazine free, placing it in Singh's lap. Singh nodded once, grateful. She crouched low beside Singh, placing a hand briefly on his shoulder. You deserved better. His eyes opened, soft and tired. We all did. For a moment silence pressed heavy, then she turned, pulling Ramirez by the arm. Move. He resisted at first, then stumbled after her. His breath hitched as they left the cave, Singh's silhouette shrinking behind them. Neither spoke as they crawled along the rocks, every sound amplified in the stillness. Halfway up the ridge, gunfire cracked behind them. Singh had begun his last stand. Ramirez froze, head whipping back. She gripped his arm hard. Don't. Tears shone in his eyes. He's buying us time, she cut in. Don't waste it. Gunfire echoed, sharp and desperate, then slowed. A final burst. Silence. Ramirez's face broke. He bit down hard on his lip, forcing the sob into his chest. She pulled him forward, dragging his steps until he moved again. The stars above blurred in his eyes, but she saw them clear. Each scar on her skin flared alive, maps drawn in pain. They crept north, moving fast, moving quiet. At the ridge top, she paused, scanning again. Enemy patrols fanned out below, sweeping systematically. Too many, too close. Her comm crackled faintly, the commander's voice again. Calm, deceptive. Units east, keep pressure, eliminate stragglers. Her jaw clenched, every word was betrayal. Ramirez finally spoke, voice hoarse. Why would he do this, his own people? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes fixed on the desert, on the headlights tightening the noose. When she did speak, her voice was low, bitter. Because to him, we're not his people. Ramirez stared, confused. Then who are we? She looked at him, at his too young face streaked with tears and dirt. Expendable, she said. The word hit like a bullet. Ramirez's breath shuddered, his innocence shattering with it. But there was no time to grieve. She pulled him lower, pointing toward a narrow ravine cutting deeper into the desert. That way, stay in the shadows, don't stop. He nodded, wiping his eyes roughly. His jaw set in a way it hadn't before. Something inside him had hardened tonight. They slid down into the ravine, swallowed by darkness. The air grew cooler, the ground uneven. Their boots splashed faintly in trickles of water hidden in stone. For a moment, the sound felt almost alien, water in the desert, life where there should be none. They paused, catching breath. Ramirez leaned against the rock, his voice breaking. He died for us. She nodded, yes. The boy looked at her, searching. So we can't waste it. We have to make it mean something. Her chest ached. She saw the shift in him, fear becoming resolve. She remembered the first time that shift happened in herself, years ago, under fire, when the world snapped into something harder and more unforgiving. She wanted to protect him from it, but maybe this was the only way soldiers were born. The ravine curved, guiding them deeper. Above, the stars burned, and her scars burned with them. Each line on her skin whispered the same truth. Survival was never free. It was purchased, paid for, by those who stayed behind so others could move forward. Singh had bought them this night. Now it was up to her to make sure it wasn't wasted. What if the desert itself was listening? Every step in the ravine felt watched, as if the stone carried whispers forward to waiting ears. She walked ahead, rifle up, eyes sweeping the curves of rock. Ramirez trailed close, his silence heavier than before. The boy who had filled silence with nervous chatter was gone. Singh's death had burned that part out of him. The walls narrowed, the moonlight thinned. Their breaths came sharper, echoing against stone. She raised a fist, stop. Ramirez froze instantly, his training finally instinct. She crouched, pressing her cheek to the cold earth. Vibrations, subtle but there, engines distant. She scanned ahead with her scope. The ravine opened to a basin where faint lights glowed, enemy vehicles parked in a crescent, soldiers moving like ants. They were setting up a temporary station. Radios crackled, maps spread across hoods, a command node. Ramirez leaned close, whispering, "We can't go through." She didn't answer. She studied the layout, trucks, tents, guards, a comms array rising on a tripod. She knew what it meant. They weren't just searching anymore. They were hunting with precision. If that array went live, drones would sweep the desert by dawn. No escape. Ramirez's eyes followed her gaze. Realization hit him. We have to take it out. The words hung, reckless but true. She looked at him. His jaw was clenched, eyes fierce through exhaustion. He wasn't asking, he was deciding. For the first time tonight, she almost smiled. Singh's sacrifice hadn't been wasted. Still, her voice stayed low, grounded. We only get one chance. Quiet, fast. He nodded. They moved back into shadow, preparing. She stripped weight from her pack, leaving only essentials. Ramirez mirrored her, his hand steady now. She studied his movements, sharper, more deliberate. He was learning in real time, forged by loss. They waited, listening. Timing mattered. Soldiers rotated in pairs, smoking near the trucks, trading tired jokes. She memorized their rhythm. 30 seconds between patrol passes. At the right moment, she signaled. They slid forward, shadows against shadows. The sand muffled their steps, every movement rehearsed in silence. Near the first truck, she froze. 2 men leaned against the hood, talking low. She caught fragments, complaints about rations, about missing home, human voices. She hated that. It was easier when the enemy was faceless. She motioned Ramirez around, but the boy paused, eyes fixed on the men. She saw his grip tighten on the rifle, his knuckles white. She touched his arm lightly, wait. His breath shook once, then stilled. He nodded, letting the men fade back into background noise. They slipped past, weaving toward the comms tripod. The array pulsed faint red lights, wires snaking to a generator. She crouched, pulling a charge from her vest. Silent timer, minimal flash, enough to fry the circuits. But before she said it, her comm buzzed faintly. She froze. A voice, the commander's, smooth, cert. Sweep complete. Confirm kills on 3 operatives, 2 unaccounted. Continue narrowing the net. Remember, no survivors. Her hand tightened on the device. No survivors. Ramirez's eyes widened. He had heard it too. His lips moved soundlessly. They want us dead. She gave no reaction, just set the charge. Click. Timer glowing faint green. 90 seconds. They slipped back, retracing steps. But as they passed the trucks, a guard stepped into their path, yawning, rifle slung. His eyes met hers. Time slowed. She lunged, clamping a hand over his mouth, knife to throat. His body stiffened, breath caught. Ramirez froze, panic flashing in his eyes. For a heartbeat, she held the blade, pulse pounding. Then she eased back, letting the man slump unconscious, pressure point hit clean. Silent, no kill. She looked at Ramirez. His eyes shone with confusion, almost anger. She shook her head once. Not every scar needs blood. They slipped into the ravine, vanishing into shadow. Behind them the charge blew. A dull thump, lights sparking, generator hissing into silence. Shouts erupted, soldiers scrambling. Chaos bloomed. They kept running. When they finally slowed, lungs burning, Ramirez grabbed her arm. "Why didn't you kill him? He would have killed us." She faced him, her voice low but sharp. "Because one more dead man doesn't change this war, but one spared man. Maybe he remembers it, maybe it matters." Ramirez stared, jaw tight. Then he looked away, muttering, "I don't know if I believe that." Her chest ached. Once she hadn't believed it either. Years of blood had drowned that idea. But she had learned scars were not just reminders of pain. They could be constellations, guiding choices. And sometimes, choosing not to kill was the only way to stay human. They pressed deeper into the ravine, guided by starlight. Hours stretched. Exhaustion pressed. At dawn, the sky burned pale orange. They paused on a ledge overlooking the desert. Wind cut sharp against their faces. Below, dust rose from columns of vehicles sweeping patterns across the sand. The net was closing. Ramirez collapsed against a rock, chest heaving. "We can't keep outrunning them." She said nothing. She traced the horizon with her scope. Somewhere out there lay the extraction point. If command hadn't fully abandoned them, if betrayal hadn't reached farther than she feared. Her scars itched beneath her sleeve, memory burning. She remembered the night she earned the deepest one. A mission gone wrong, comrades left behind, silence from command where there should have been rescue. Back then she swore never again, yet here she was, history repeating. Ramirez broke the silence, his voice small. "Do you ever think about not making it, just letting it end?" The question hit raw. She turned to him, seeing not just the boy but the weight on his shoulders. He wasn't asking about the mission. He was asking about himself, about carrying death in his chest. Her voice softened. "Yes, more times than I can count." He swallowed, eyes dropping. "And why didn't you?" She looked at the rising sun, the sky bleeding into day. "Because someone once told me scars aren't endings. They're maps. They show where you've been. And maybe they show where you still need to go." Ramirez's eyes glistened. He looked at her as if trying to memorize the words, to anchor himself with them. They sat in silence as the desert brightened. For a moment, time slowed. Two shadows on a ledge, caught between survival and surrender. Then engines roared closer. The hunt had found their trail again. She rose, rifle ready. Ramirez followed, his movements no longer hesitant. The desert gave no mercy, but neither did they. And somewhere, far beyond the horizon, the constellations of her scars pointed onward. What does it take to break a soldier? Not bullets, not blood, not even death. It was silence. The silence of command when you called for help and no one answered. She knew that silence too well, and tonight it wrapped around her like a noose. The desert stretched endless as she and Ramirez pushed through jagged stone, their shadows long under the rising sun. Heat rose sharp, shimmering waves bending the horizon. Every breath tasted of sand. Ramirez stumbled, catching himself on a boulder. His face was pale beneath grime. "We're not gonna make it," he muttered, voice cracking. She steadied him, firm hand under his arm. "We're still breathing. That's making it." He gave a broken laugh, bitter. "That's all it is, just breathing." Her eyes stayed forward, for now. They climbed higher into the rocks, scanning for cover. Enemy convoys crawled below like predators, their engines humming, their dust trails spreading. The noose was tightening. At the ridge, she dropped flat, pulling Ramirez down with her. Through her scope, she saw a figure standing apart from the patrols, binoculars raised. Not a soldier, not local. Her gut twisted. She knew that stance, that posture. The commander. Ramirez squinted. Wait, is that? Yes, her voice was hard. He lowered his rifle. Confusion flickered. But he's supposed to be. With us, her jaw clenched. Not anymore. The boy's face broke open in disbelief. He sold us out. He's the reason. Singh. His voice cracked, rage spilling raw. She grabbed his shoulder, forcing him to focus. Don't waste anger, use it. But even as she said it, her chest burned. She remembered the commander's voice in her ear weeks ago, calm and steady as she bled on a different battlefield. You'll never be alone, not under my watch. She had believed him, trusted him, and now this. Betrayal cut deeper than any wound. Below, the commander lowered the binoculars. His radio crackled. Soldiers shifted, vehicles repositioning. The trap was closing. She pulled Ramirez back into shadow. We move now. They scrambled down the far side of the ridge, rocks slicing under their boots. The sun climbed higher, heat pressing like a weight on their backs. Sweat stung her scars, reopening memories with every drop. By midday, their canteens were nearly dry. Ramirez's lips cracked. He stumbled often now, leaning heavier on his rifle as a crutch. But he kept moving. She saw the fire in his eyes. Singh's sacrifice burned there, fueling steps when his body wanted to quit. Still, she knew. One mistake, one misstep, and the desert would swallow them whole. They reached another ravine, deeper, darker. Shade cooled their skin, but the silence here was worse. Every drip of unseen water echoed like a warning. Ramirez dropped to sit, chest heaving. We can't keep running blind. She crouched beside him, scanning the narrow path ahead. We don't run blind, we run forward. He shook his head, frustration boiling over. Forward to what? They're everywhere. His voice broke. He wanted us dead from the start, didn't he? Her hand tightened on her rifle. She wanted to deny it, to soften it for him, but the truth pressed too heavy. Yes. The word hung between them like a shot fired. Ramirez's face crumpled. So what now? We die here. She looked at him, really looked. His youth still clung to him, even under blood and dust. A boy forced to carry scars too early. Her voice softened, low and deliberate. No, we don't die here. Not while we can still fight. Not while his betrayal can still mean something. Ramirez's eyes lifted, confusion mingling with fragile hope. Mean what? That we outlast him. For a moment, silence pressed heavy. Then he nodded, jaw setting. She rose, motioning him forward. They followed the ravine, each step pulling them deeper into shadow. But the silence broke suddenly, footsteps ahead, voices low. She froze, hand raised. Ramirez gripped his rifle, eyes wide. From around the bend, 2 enemy soldiers appeared, rifles slung casual, unaware. Too close. Her breath slowed, options raced. She signaled Ramirez, left flank. She moved right. They waited. The men drew closer, laughing faintly, words foreign but tone unmistakable, mocking, relaxed. At 3 paces she struck, rifle butt to skull. The first man dropped soundless. Ramirez lunged, knife clumsy but true, pressing the second into the wall. The man struggled, eyes wide, before falling still. The boy froze, staring at the blade in his hand, at the body slumped against stone. His chest heaved. His lips trembled. She stepped close, steady voice. Look at me, not him. His eyes snapped to hers, glassy, terrified. You did what you had to, she said. You breathe, you move forward. He swallowed hard, nodding though his hands shook. Another scar written inside him, another constellation forming. They stripped the soldiers' gear, finding half a canteen, a pack of rations. Small mercies, enough to keep moving. By dusk, they emerged from the ravine into open desert again. The horizon glowed crimson, sun sinking behind jagged rock. Beauty and danger blended in the same sky. Ramirez walked beside her, quieter now, shoulders heavier but steadier. He no longer looked like the boy who had stumbled into the cave. Singh's sacrifice, the betrayal, the kill, they had carved something harder into him. She watched him from the corner of her eye, pride tangled with sorrow. He was becoming a soldier, and soldiers rarely stayed whole. Night fell. They made camp in a shallow hollow, stars spilling across the sky. She cleaned her rifle in silence, each motion precise. Ramirez sat nearby, staring upward. After a long pause, he spoke. "You ever think the stars look like scars too?" She glanced up. The constellations glimmered, cold and eternal. "Yes," she said softly. He turned to her. "Then maybe scars aren't just pain. Maybe they are stories, guides, like you said." Her throat tightened. She saw Singh's face in memory, his voice about bread and home. She saw every comrade lost, every name etched inside her. And she thought maybe Ramirez was right. Maybe scars were more than wounds. Maybe they were maps, written across flesh and sky, showing survivors where to go when everything else was dark. The desert wind shifted, carrying distant engines again. The hunt had not ended. But for the first time in a long time, she felt something stir beneath the exhaustion. Not just survival, not just defiance. Hope. Fragile, flickering, but alive. And as the stars burned above, her scars burned too, constellations guiding her through a sky no one else could read. How do you know when a night will be your last? She asked herself that as she stared into the horizon, the desert stretched endless beneath a star-drowned sky. The engines were closer now, the hunt tightening, headlights sweeping arcs across the dunes. Ramirez lay beside her in the shallow hollow, his chest rising in exhausted rhythm, rifle clutched even in half-sleep. She hadn't slept, couldn't. Each scar along her arms and ribs throbbed like sparks under her skin. They weren't wounds anymore. They were warnings. The calm buzzed faintly at her hip. She hesitated before raising it. Static hissed, then his voice, the commander's calm, certain poison. "In this, soldier, there's no way out. You know it. Better to surrender than vanish in the sand. I'll even make sure the reports call you honorable." Her grip tightened until her knuckles whitened. Honorable. From the man who had left Singh to die. From the man who had traded them like currency. She lowered the comm slowly, then crushed it against the rock until it snapped into silence. Ramirez stirred at the sound, eyes blinking open. What did he say? She looked at the boy. No, not a boy anymore. The desert had burned that out of him. Nothing worth remembering. He sat up, scanning the headlights growing nearer. Then what now? Her eyes stayed on the glow crawling toward them. She felt the weight of every decision pressing on her chest. If they stayed here, they'd be overrun. If they fled into the dunes, they'd collapse before dawn. Only one option remained. "We finish this," she said. Ramirez frowned. "Finish how?" She reached into her pack, pulling free her last charge. Small, powerful, enough to light the desert sky, enough to cripple the convoy if placed right. His eyes widened. "You mean?" "Yes," her voice steady. "We don't run anymore." The headlights grew, beams scattering across the sand. Convoy engines roared like beasts. Soldiers, silhouettes moved atop vehicles, rifles scanning. Ramirez's breath quickened, but then he steadied, looking at her. "Then we do it together." For a moment she just studied him. The raw fear in his eyes, tempered now with something fiercer, resolve. Singh had bought him time. And in that time, Ramirez had grown into someone who could stand here at the edge of death and not break. She nodded once. Together. They moved low across the sand, weaving shadows between rocks. The convoy drew closer, halting in a crescent, light stabbing outward. Orders barked. Soldiers spilled into formation. The trap was nearly sprung. But the hunters hadn't realized their prey was circling back. They crawled close, hearts pounding, until the generator truck loomed ahead, the command hub, radios glowing. the commander himself standing tall in the open, binoculars raised once more. Ramirez tensed beside her, his whisper cut like a blade. "It's him." Her jaw tightened. Yes, the man who had promised never to leave her alone, the man whose voice had steadied her through battles, who had said words she once believed, now just another enemy in the desert. For a heartbeat, memories warred inside her. Trust, betrayal, loyalty, loss, then silence, cold, clear. She placed the charge beneath the generator's fuel tank, setting the timer. 90 seconds. They pulled back, crawling into shadow. But Ramirez froze suddenly, eyes fixed. A soldier had spotted movement. Shouts erupted. Lights swung, blinding beams cutting across the sand. Gunfire split the night. They ran. Bullets sparked against stone, sand exploding around them. Ramirez dropped low, returning fire in short bursts, his aim steady despite fear clawing at his chest. She covered him, rifle sharp, each shot measured, precise. 2 men dropped, others scattered, shouts rising. 90 seconds. The commander's voice boomed through the chaos. "Stand down, bring them alive." Alive for what? For silence, for erasure, for reports that twisted truth into ash. She fired again, forcing them back. Ramirez shouted over the thunder. Timer. 30 seconds. They dove into a hollow, pressing against rock as bullets ripped past. Ramirez's face shone with sweat and dust, teeth clenched. "If this doesn't work." "It will," she cut him off. Her hand pressed his shoulder firm. "Look at me." His eyes met hers. "You survived this far, that's no accident. Remember that. Whatever happens next, you keep moving." He swallowed hard, nodding. His grip on the rifle tightened. The explosion ripped the desert open. A roar of fire and metal. The generator truck burst into a storm of flame, shockwave rolling across the sand. Soldiers screamed, convoys scattering. Radios fried, lights blown out. Darkness swallowed the battlefield. They used the chaos, sprinting low across the dunes, weaving through fire-lit shadows. The commander's voice shouted orders, but static drowned him out. His net was gone, his control shattered. At the ridge they dropped, gasping, watching flames consume the camp below. Vehicles burned, men scrambled, the trap turned inside out. Ramirez laughed, breathless, almost wild. "We did it." But she didn't laugh. Her eyes fixed on the commander, still standing amid the fire, shouting into a dead radio. His silhouette burned against the inferno, proud even as the desert swallowed his lies. For a moment she raised her rifle, scope centered on his chest. One squeeze and betrayal would end in blood. Her finger tightened, then stopped. Ramirez saw. Why not? He deserves it. Her scars burned under the stars. Every mark, every line, guiding her like maps. She lowered the rifle slowly. "No, some scars are punishment enough." The commander's voice carried faintly, broken by fire and static. Orders to men who no longer heard him. A leader surrounded by flames, alone at last. She turned away. Ramirez followed. They walked into the desert night, guided only by starlight. For hours they moved, silence between them heavy but alive. When dawn broke, the horizon stretched endless once more, but this time it didn't feel empty. Ramirez finally spoke, voice soft. "Do you think Singh would have seen this as worth it?" She looked at the rising sun, at scars glowing faintly beneath its light. "Yes, because we're still here, because we'll carry him with us." They walked on, step by step, breath by breath. The desert wind whispered, brushing scars that were no longer just reminders of pain. They were constellations guiding her, guiding him, through skis no one else could read. And in that silence there was dignity. Not loud, not spoken. Just lived.